So I'm trying to record these a little earlier and post them a little earlier because something came up yesterday in the evening. I had a lot of stuff I had to get done, and it all took longer than I thought, and I didn't get to record Fervorinos yesterday. But I was thinking about what to do in the extraordinary form because today in the general Roman calendar is the Friday of the third week after the octave of Easter. So it's a ferial day in Paschal Tide, so this would be the third time I would be talking about the readings from Sunday. And while there is an inexhaustible richness to the gospel, there's not an inexhaustible richness to my intellect. And so I was thinking, well, what will I say? And then I realized that the saint I celebrated yesterday, St. Stanislaus, is celebrated today in Poland. St. Stanislaus is a bishop and a martyr and the patron saint of Poland. And I thought, well, this is great. I'll talk about St. Stanislaus today, and it's appropriate because in his native land, this is the day where he is celebrated on the 8th instead of the 7th. And the life of St. Stanislaus is one of a great holiness and a great desire for justice. St. Stanislaus was one of the first really native Polish bishops. He was an advisor in these matters to the Holy Father. He was an advisor in these matters to dukes and to kings. And ultimately he came to conflict with King Bolesław, the king of Poland at the time. King Bolesław is remembered by a number of nicknames, if you will. The Generous, because especially early in his reign, he endowed many churches and monasteries. The Bold, because he would act boldly, sometimes foolishly without thinking. We'll see a bit of that in the story to come. And also the Cruel, because he could be cruel, and we'll see a bit of that in the story to come as well. And as tends to happen in times, there were various conflicts at times between the bishop and the king. Conflicts over the possession of church land, things like that. But what ultimately brought things to a head is that Bolesław was living a life of unchastity, a life of very public infidelity, a life of, ignoring the precepts of the church and the sanctity of the marriage bed. And the bishop admonished him on this, privately and publicly. And finally, the bishop decided there was no other recourse, and he excommunicated the king. Now this, of course, in a Christian kingdom can be problematic for a number of reasons. One is it kind of removes your moral authority. It causes people to question your authority to rule. And certainly a number of the nobles who had suffered from Bolesław's cruelty in various ways began to think this is an opportunity to maneuver a better person onto the throne. So this being the case, the king, rather than amending his life and doing penance, declared the bishop a traitor to the crown. And there's a lot of parallels here in the story of St. Stanislaus with the story of St. Thomas Becket, but one that is very different is, unlike in the circumstances of Thomas Becket, no one was willing to kill the bishop for the king. Not just in a sense of like, oh, we think that this is what the king wants, so we'll go do it, but in the sense that the king's like, go kill the bishop. And they're like, nah, not going to murder the bishop for you. So, being both bold and cruel, Bolesław went and did it himself. He went and he struck down St. Stanislaus while he was celebrating Mass with his own hand, with his own sword. And the legend goes that he then divided up Stanislaus' body, cut it up, dismembered it, and had the parts dumped all over Poland so that they would be eaten by the wild beasts, and they would, he wouldn't have a proper burial, wouldn't be any relics, etc. But the story goes that God miraculously reconstituted the body of St. Stanislaus so that he could be buried. And this has become important to the Polish people because they see in the miraculous reconstitution of St. Stanislaus a promise that if they are true to the faith, as he was, then what God did for him, the patron of Poland, it will do for Poland. If you know anything about European history, and I'm no expert, but you can see this even just looking over historical maps. Poland is there, Poland disappears, Poland reappears kind of somewhere else. Like Poland is here, then it's gone, then it reappears, but it doesn't have any of the land it had before. And Poland's history is one where it is often cut up and devoured or attempted to be devoured by greater powers, that they seek to cut it up and devour it as the king sought to cut up the body of St. Stanislaus and have his body devoured by wild beasts. And the belief is that in the miraculous reconstitution of St. Stanislaus, there's also a promise that if the Polish people live faithfully, and they follow the faith, and they are faithful to God's plan, then as God miraculously reconstituted the body of their patron, he will reconstitute them. He will reconstitute their nation. And this is this kind of deep pious belief at the origins of the faith in Poland, the origin of them as a people, is why that Poland will do things not just as matters of piety, but often as matters of official law. Like, for example, declare that Jesus Christ is King of Poland. Not just a pious belief that, he's king of everything and so he needs to be king of our country, but like literally Jesus Christ is King of Poland. Similarly, Our Lady of Czestochowa, Our Lady as Queen of Poland, that the piety of the Poles does find its way in many respects into official law. And there's something important there, just like in the life of Saint Stanislaus himself, that God requires obedience not just from individuals as a matter of personal level, but of individuals who hold authority. That, for example, regulative prudence, the prudence to rule, is a special case of, but not completely distinct from, the virtue of prudence that a man needs. And just as prudence can't live without justice, courage, and temperance, and those can't live without prudence, that prudence as the virtue that governs the way of acting justly, the way of acting temperately, the way of acting courageously, has to, it lives in, symbiotic maybe would be the best word, or a mutual relationship with the other virtues. That's true of the ruler as well. And that we go, and I think this is a major problem I've seen all my life in America, of excusing the evils of our rulers, well, because they govern well. And they don't, really. Like, maybe accidentally. But, if I make a horrendously bad argument full of untrue premises, but my conclusion is true, my conclusion isn't true by virtue of all the errors I've thought of. And, Thomas will talk about how prudence kind of sets the syllogism of practical reason of how the good is to be done and the evil to be avoided. And, maybe you pass a good law if you're a bad person, but you don't do that by virtue of the fact that you're a bad person. You do it almost by luck in some sense and by providence in another. But the fact is that we do have a tendency, I think, in America to excuse the sinfulness of our rulers, especially in a partisan way on both sides. Like, this guy is horrible because he did this. Well, my guy, it doesn't matter because my guy's good because he's my guy. Which, I guess if you want to have politics as team sports, we might as well just make a red and blue chariot and just have races. I don't know, as the most decadent kind of Byzantine way, at their worst. Why not? Let's paint a red NASCAR and a blue NASCAR, and we'll race them, and whoever wins gets to be president or something. Why not? If it's just a team sport. But anyway, and so in St. Stanislaus' life, we see a couple of things from the readings that the Church gives for him. So the first in the Book of Wisdom is how the just man is vindicated. That the foolish will mock him and think him, what he did is worthless and silly, but ultimately his soul is in God's hands and he will stand before God with the saints, as St. Stanislaus does. So the need for that, to recognize that sometimes doing the right thing will make you foolish in the eyes of the world, as it may have appeared foolish to enter into conflict with the king over his own kind of peccadillos, rather than to be like, oh, well, he's the king, I guess he can do whatever he wants and be unfaithful and adulterous and whatever, but that doesn't affect things, because it does. And also, of course, the gospel reading from John. I'm the vine and you are the branches, that we are grafted onto Christ, that we have life because of him, that we bear fruit because of him. That's not just true in our personal lives, but it has to be true in our public lives as well, and ultimately in the lives of our country. And how the story of St. Stanislaus, and the story especially of his martyrdom and the miraculous reconstitution of his body, has moved Poland to recognize that holiness is a matter of individual holiness, but also a matter of them trying to be holy as a country, making a holy country, so that God will continue to reconstitute them and give them life as individuals, certainly, but as a nation as well, as a people, And this reality that I think that we need in our lives and in our country, that holiness is not just a private matter, that the gospel is not just a private matter, that morality is not just a private matter, but that as St. John Paul II said, Pope St. John Paul II, and speaking of St. Stanislaus, as an exemplar and a martyr for the moral order that Christ sets up in the world, that moral order needs to govern our lives, but also our nations and our rulers, and that we need to demand that, and to make it happen both by living holiness in our own lives, by raising up others in holiness, those we have authority over to form, priests with their people, bishops with their dioceses, parents with their children, etc. But also that we need to demand that in the public square and not be told that we can't speak of these things because other people don't agree with us and we can only talk about what everybody agrees on. It's preposterous. Truth is truth, and if we have truth, we need to proclaim it from the housetops. You don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel, etc., etc. Every single gospel line that speaks about how these things are not just a matter of my private life, but need to govern how I act publicly and need to be declared publicly so they can govern how everybody else acts, because Christ is not just king of my heart and my soul and my life, though he is king of that, but he's also king of everything. He's king of our nation, he's king of the universe, and all knees must bend to him. And in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue proclaim to the glory of God the Father that Jesus Christ is Lord. And that's not just a happy line from Paul, that's expired truth that we need to live. And I think we see that in the life of St. Stanislaus and the effects that he has had, his life and death and miracles have had on the Polish people. And we need to seek to, in our own ways, to live that as best we can, and to demand that in our rulers, and to demand that kind of boldness to speak the gospel, even though it's foolishness to the world, in our own lives and in the lives of those who lead us. As always, I'm remembering you in my prayers, my masses. Please stay safe out there. Say an Ave for me if you get the chance, and always remember that God is in control.